that's
right.
good. Right.
As you were. Thank you, everybody.
So I am on the schedule today to give you a 30-minute talk about both Cloud Native Attitude, which is the book that you'll all be getting a free copy of today, and how it fits in with Building Green Software, which is the O'Reilly book that I wrote this year and also came out this year. They are extremely well tied together. But there's a question that lots of people have asked me already this evening. What is cloud native? What is my definition of cloud native? What do I think it all comes down to in the end? Is it all about the technology? Is it about something else? And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about, as I was walking here this evening, thinking about how I was going to do my talk. I thought it's interesting because a 30-minute talk in front of an audience, great, it's useful, very good, learning things over. I would say over the past few years, new things differently. To look at podcasts as well as just sitting and listening to
You're covering the signal.
Oh, sorry.
You can just have it.
I will. So hold it. Okay.
Thank you so much.
That's wrong.
Just keep it somewhere. So
Yep.
Because you're literally covering the signal.
Oh, okay.
Wireless. Sorry.
That's all right. Here we go. By precision, if my technology, indeed. I'll hold it like this. Is that okay? That's good. Excellent. So yes, but we all consume information in a slightly different way now. It's become very popular to do a podcast rather than a standard monolithic talk. So on my way here, as I didn't talk to anybody about this, I thought, do you know, I think that there's nothing that represents production more than giving a talk on stage. When you're giving a talk on stage, your talk is in production. But that doesn't mean that you can't change what you're going to do as you go along. You can change things. You can say, well, but, you know, if a talk at a conference, if a talk like this at a meetup is a bit like a monolith, is there a way that I could make it a little bit more microservice-y? The obvious way of doing that with a talk like this is to think about a podcast. Because what is a podcast if not really a couple of expert microservices talking to one another, and they all have their expertise and they share it together, and they have a different, as a result they produce a product for their users, for their listeners, that is a slightly different product that combines the good of the individual microservices who are participating in the podcast. So I thought, do you know, it would be quite good if on the fly we changed the configuration of what we were doing here. Now you could consider me to be a there are a load of people I could just pull out who are experts, who would also microservices. Ian back there, I could definitely pull him out into a podcast, or John, or David Parker in the audience, or Hannah, of course. But that seems a bit mean. There are a couple of people who have already committed to join in my crazy schemes to change things on the fly, and one of them is already sitting up here, which is Jamie, who has no idea what I'm about to do. So really, I think we should segue from giving a monolithic talk to, and we should try out something different. We should do a little bit of podcast. Come over here, bring your chair, because we can't stand or we'll look like Morecambe and Wise, and we talk about what we've done, why we did it, and what we've learned about it from, because one of the things that you were talking about then is you were talking mostly about technology. What is the reason for, what are the technologies that feed into cloud native? But what I really learned when I was going out and talking to and interviewing all kinds of businesses, including Greg's, all over the UK, the best businesses that were working on cloud native and were really ahead on it, was that it wasn't really about technology. And you'll read this in the book. It wasn't really about technology. And the reason why we called it the cloud native attitude was really great because it wasn't about technology, it was about an attitude. It was about a kind of thing that business wanted, all those businesses wanted to be able to do. And what they wanted to be able to do was change things quickly and easily and fast in small steps. Things that no longer, as you mentioned, no longer being afraid of change, being able to embrace change, try things out, try things quite directly into production if necessary, and see what happened and learn from it, experiment. And the only way you do that is by being able to make smaller changes at once that are not that scary and try them out and learn from them. So this is a very heavy-handed, and I apologise for I've never done this before, this is a very heavy-handed analogy for cloud native itself. Can you change your product on the fly, what you're offering to your customers, and learn from that? And that was what the cloud native attitude was. When I spoke to everybody, that was the reason why they did it. They wanted to build an organisation that was flexible, that could make changes. And it was for that reason that when I wrote Building Green Software, when we wrote Building Green Software that came out last year, I approached Jamie and I said, we really need to reissue Cloud Native Attitude, because there is an incredible, important overlap between these two concepts, right at the start, absolutely fundamental, which is that getting software, green software is software that is ready to run on top of renewables. That's it. That is what it is. Renewables rather than fossil fuel generated electricity, because they are different. It is not a like-for-like replacement. There are big differences between electricity, the availability, the cost of electricity generated by renewables versus fossil fuels. That means that if you want to build software which is designed to run on renewables, you have to change things. That is the fundamental thing. You will have to change. The way that you design your software will have to change. And therefore, you need to be able to change. That is that underneath all of becoming green is the ability to change anything at all. If you can't change, you can't become green. It's not an impossible change. It's actually quite a sensible change. When you read, there's a whole chapter on the kind of things you need to do in Cloud Native Attitude. That was one of the chapters that we added in. But fundamentally, if you can't change, you can't go green, because it does require that. So I think that is the absolutely unifying and incredibly important concept that unifies the two books, Building Green Software and Cloud Native Attitude, and why it was so important that we reissued Cloud Native Attitude. And it's also the overlap between Cloud Native and Green Software and DevOps. Because I would really say that DevOps is about being able to change things as well. I mean, it's not the whole definition of what DevOps is, but part of it is bringing together dev and ops so that things can change, so that you can get the fast flow, you can roll out smaller changes more frequently. So all of these things, cloud native, green software and DevOps, I am going to challengingly say, fundamentally, they are the same thing. So let's come into our podcast. Right. We had some questions left over. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We can discuss this. We can do an Alistair and Rory. I'll be Rory, you can be Alistair.
No, please. Can't we be the Tom Holland guy?
Oh yeah, okay.
We'll be the history people.
Okay, we could.
You'll be Tom Holland, the other one. No, I'll be Tom. Which one am I in? Which one am I? Am I Tom or the other guy? Tom Holland. Am I Tom?
I don't know.
I'm Rory.
Right. Okay.
Just because none of us can decide who's going to be Rory.
Fine.
So you talked a little bit about why we wrote the book, and it was a confusing time 7 years ago. It is very interesting how little has changed in the book over that time. More companies have grown into it. Very few companies have grown away from it. So one of the interesting things in the book was going back over the 7 years and talking to people endlessly. Paul Greggs had to talk to me like every
Every couple of years.
every year for the past 7 years, and say, what are you doing now? Why are you doing it? What have you learned? What have you done? Which has been really interesting. But in some ways, it kind of distracts you in that we were talking about the people who were ahead 7 years ago and really doing a very good job then, and we kept talking to them. But in that 10 years, most people still haven't really adopted cloud native. It's like, it's your experience.
No, it's true. It's true. Most companies have struggled, and the bigger companies take 2, 3, 4 years to just start to get the basics right. And I think one of the biggest challenges is, without continuous delivery and build automation, which extends now to infrastructure as a service, things like Terraform, you can't really do it. And those are difficult things. And you need above average engineers or really good teams and emotionally mature people. And you imagine there's a bell curve. Well, there are just not that many savvy people around to do it. So it's a real challenge. And the problem is we can't really dumb cloud down because distributed system development is one of the hardest to do. So there's a sort of benchmark of teams and companies who can do it, and it's quite a hard benchmark to get over. And so I think a lot of companies are like, oh, is there any tooling? And of course the cloud providers say, yeah, we've got loads of tooling, and we've got a professional services team that can definitely help you. But in reality, it's a huge challenge, And
so something you said earlier in response to a very good question there about do we talk only about cloud native? We talk about the fact that actually lift and shift is a very common way for people to go into the cloud. I would say, and it can work. I would say that to my mind, the major issue with lift and shift is that the big mindset shift for going cloud native that I saw as being very much reflected in whether you were successful was the whole, okay, we're doing this so we can change things and we can iterate and we can muck around and we can experiment. The trouble with lift and shift is that you're then starting with a gigantic project, which is really painful and is with a huge deadline associated with it, and everybody's going to be tearing their hair out. So it's quite hard to move psychologically between. I would say that cloud native success goes with an iterative mindset. It's quite hard to move that, to adopt that after you've done a gigantic project, because everybody moves into a different mindset, the mindset of nervous breakdown, burnouts, giant project. And at the end, when you finish, when you're finally in the cloud, which is only halfway there, because then you have to modernize in the cloud, everybody just goes, well, I don't want to don't want to touch this ever again.
The problem with change is that people who want stability and safety and rhythms and cadences are drawn to large organisations. So they're typically staffed with people who are not psychologically wired to want to change too much, take risks. Those type of people go to startups or scale-ups. So they're already on a bit of a back foot because you're asking people to do something that it's not really in their nature to do. And that's the reason they joined a big bank or a big multinational.
It's true. Although, so one of the examples in the book that I like the best is the FT, the Financial Times, who were a classic enterprise, classic old school enterprise. But they did decide, and they, like quite a lot of the other people in the book, decided that we need to move, we need to be able to change. And I always quite like their rationalised kind of talk to the majors, loads and loads. Everybody was sick to death of me, constantly going back and saying, why are you doing this? They said, well, we see an existential threat here, which is that eventually there are going to be no more print newspapers. It's like, but we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what the end result is going to be. We can't just define a giant project that is about, because this was more than 10 years ago. This was like 15 years ago when they decided print's dead eventually. So what they decided they needed to do was, in order to survive, they needed the ability to change to whatever was coming along. So they said, well, rather than go for an end, we're going to go for a new way of being, which is going to be fitter and healthier and more agile and more able to change things. And so it's enterprises can do it, but one of the things that really struck me was that it's quite hard for enterprises to do it unless they really think there's an existential threat and they believe in it from the bottom to the top.
So the thing I liked about the FT case is they had good managers. And one of the most challenging things for my day-to-day work, so I'm no longer the chief exec of Container Solutions. I gave that up about 1 year ago because I'd been in charge for 10 years and, you know, I'm a creative person, and like 10 years was enough. So we found a replacement, and so now all I do is help. I'm back to where I was 20 years ago. I'm consulting, I'm coaching, and I'm teaching. Now, one of the biggest challenges I personally face in my day-to-day work is we start to help companies, their senior executives, sometimes the chief execs, say to me, well, what are we doing wrong? How are we different to the FT? And I say, well, the FT, you know, they took this seriously. and they say, but we are. And I'm like, oh, but you're not. You're not. And that's a blind spot. So managers, or the type of people who put their hand up for management, are usually the least qualified to do the job. And so when you say to them, you need to take this seriously, it's a blind spot because they think they are. I say, your communications have got to be better. Oh yes, but I've told so and I've done that, and I've done a PowerPoint. Okay, so good management is fundamental, and I don't think it's a coincidence that there was a woman in charge at the FT. I don't think that's a coincidence. Good management is key to all of this. Don't worry, all right. And that's a very hard message to get across to somebody who believes that they're a good manager, and is a little bit perplexed as to why it's going wrong. That's a massive challenge.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, one of the issues that, so a startup is quite easy because everything's an existential threat for a startup. So you can if you say, well, look, we need to be able to change because we face some existential threats, they'll say, oh yeah, everything. Enterprises, almost their definition is that they have product market fit at the moment.
Yeah.
They and therefore they have a whole layer of management who really don't want to break what's currently working.
Yeah.
So it's quite hard to persuade everybody that there is value to being able to change because everything's going okay at the moment. So why would you want to change things now?
There was the classic Charles Handy. Did you ever read Charles Handy's book? Yep. Does anybody know who Charles Handy is? He's a manager. He used to draw this curve. You know, it would start on the ground and it would rise up and then it would collapse. And then just at the sort of, is it the zenith, the top of the curve? Is that the zenith?
Apex.
Apex. Yeah. So basically, the time to move is when you're on the up. Yeah. So point A is the time to move. But point A is when profits are there, everybody's happy, your customers are happy. So everybody says, well, why move? Now, once you've crossed the hump and you're on your way down, you get to point B, and everybody said, we need to go now, we need to change, we need to modernise. In fact, why didn't you do it 2 years ago? Back at point A. But the problem is at point B, you've got a lot further to climb. Your competitors are ahead of you, your people are ahead of you, some of the markets ahead of you, your people have decided to leave, they're fed up and stuff like that. This is a huge challenge, and good managers are always thinking this is point A, we've got to start changing now and modernising now, and it becomes a constant in their work. And I think one of the issues of large organisations, the quarterly cycle doesn't help, the business cycle doesn't help, is they're always thinking in terms of beginning, middles and ends. They think it's a novel. It's actually a long-running TV show where at the end of every series somebody gets killed. And then in the next series,
chopping block effect, isn't it?
Chopping block effect. And in the next series, you've got to do it all again. In fact, that was the biggest lesson I could give. People say to me, what have you learned being the chief executive of Container Solutions? And I remember for that first 3 years, we would work so hard. We brought DockerCon to Amsterdam. We did that, by the way. We brought them there, and I was like, right, DockerCon in the Science Museum, everyone will come. They all know we co-host it. Boom, sales pipeline sorted. To my utter dismay, nothing happened. Nothing happened. 1,000 people had walked through our doors. We'd taken them around the city on bike tours. I was like, oh, okay, that's not good. Then I did it again the next year, hired somebody, did this, got a partnership with Google or some shit like that. Boom, we're there. Nothing happened. And then I read, yes, but business is not a romance novel. It's a long-running TV show like Game of Thrones. Now I understood. So that's basically how we ran the business. We knew that the challenges would come, we'd have to overcome them, and then we'd have to do it all again. And a lot of managers just simply do not think in strategy as a never-ending series of sensible steps.
Yeah, it's interesting that that obviously you've totally forgotten. The first time, I think, the very first time we discussed writing this book, I told you to read The Second Curve by Charles Handy, which you had not read at the time.
Right.
But it's really well worth reading. And I think it really exemplifies that question we were talking about the dangers of lift and shift. The whole book is basically about you're riding high, you think nothing needs to change, and at that point everybody has the energy to change because they're feeling very positive. When things start going downhill, you know, oh no, we need to change. But now we've lost the will to live. Change requires quite a lot of, any kind of big change requires a lot of energy, it requires a lot of drive. And by the time you're going downhill, you don't have the energy to make a major change.
Yeah.
And that's what always worries me when people do lift and shift. That I'm always in two minds about these things, because sometimes you don't achieve a really difficult thing if you really knew how difficult it was. I love the misquote. There's a kind of meme of the whole thing about we don't do these things because they're hard, because they're easy, because they're hard. We don't do these things because they're easy, but because we thought they were going to be easy. There's an awful lot that only happens because you think it's going to be easy, and actually that's incredibly useful, because you wouldn't start if you knew how hard it was going to be. So sometimes it's better not to know the full horror of what you're...
So there's evolutionary truth in that. I don't remember, neither does my wife, the birth or first years of any of our children. That's true. And then I read somewhere, it's evolutionary, because if you remember how awful it was, you'd never do it again. Right? So it's true. That's a survival mechanism.
Yeah.
There's a funny story in Charles Handy. He talks about Davy's Bar. Did you hear that one?
No.
So he goes on holiday to Ireland. He went there every year, and he was looking for Davy's Bar. They served, I don't know, Guinness or whatever. He was after his lunch, and he pulled over the car and asked a local, "Where's Davy's Bar?" He says, "Well, you need to veer off down the road for a couple of kilometres. If you hit the hump bridge, you needed to take the right before." So it sounded logical, this instruction, so if he went, but then he realised, wait a minute, if I've hit the hump, then I've got to go back. So the moral of the story is that you don't really know what to do with foresight. In hindsight, it's obvious you've missed the moment. It is a challenge.
Yeah.
And how many people have that vision, and how many employed managers would have the motivation to do things properly and do things right? Not to mention that management is just a skill. It's a bunch of skills, like being a programmer is a bunch of skills, and most managers have not acquired the skills that are required to make full-scale change.
Yeah. And so making smaller changes and then seeing what happens is a logical thing to do. And yeah, whenever I think going fully cloud native is such a difficult thing to do that almost by definition you have to have adopted a way of moving forward continually before you even start doing it. You need to build the platform, if you know what I mean. You need to adopt practices that allow you to make change in order to make a change as big as that, I would say. And that really, so it might be that people didn't go cloud native because they like to make small changes and do things in a gradual way. It might be that I was only interviewing people who had been successful at it, because the only people who were successful at things like that were quite hard were the people who were doing things in a fairly iterative way.
Yeah. And I think the ones who are doing it well are high performers. They're high performers tech, high performance with management. They've got the hiring wired up, their engineering brand. They take it seriously. And I think until companies are not willing to take this work seriously, they'll fail. They'll inch forward, but not quickly enough.
It is interesting because Greg is the only person here who I actually did interview for it, and I bet that you were thinking, and if there were other people who were in the book were thinking, they'll be thinking, oh yeah, I wasn't that good at iterating through and making all these things compared to everybody else. Everybody we went back to and spoke to thought they were a lot less good than they were. Once you do it, you think, oh well, but I could be so much better. But actually, most people are not doing any of these things at all. So it's easy to think, because you're doing to always see that you could be better, rather than say, well, actually, we're pretty damn good compared to what everybody else is doing.
I think the problem is that if you admit that you're not quite where you want to be, it makes you unhappy.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people live in denial because it makes them miserable otherwise.
Yeah, that is true. That doing well does require you to live in a constant
State of angst. There's a reason
yeah.
I stepped back after 10 years.
Yeah.
There's a reason I stepped back, because the only way to run a business successfully or to run any team successfully is to be completely paranoid all the time about what comes next. And but my management team used to say to me, you need to relax. And I used to say to them, you need to worry more. What the fuck's the matter with you? Right? And that's the job. And now I don't have that job. Obviously, I'm less productive, but I'm happier. and you know, I get really frustrated because I deal with senior executives who have put their hand up to take the top spot and are worried about the holiday. And I'm like, you need to be worried about your people. And if you're not willing to put everybody before you, you're in the wrong position. But this is most managers don't understand this, and they're not willing to accept it, because taking the top seat is the pinnacle of their career. And what I try to tell them, it's not about you. That's
Yeah. So
Anyway. Sorry. I'm ranting.
No, I think that's a good time to stop now. What we can do is we're going to answer some questions now, or we can all go away. Now, I don't know whether we're better off doing the Q&A.
I think the best thing is Q&A, and then we'll break and set up the book signing here, and then when people are drinking and milling around, they can then come up and grab a book and a signature in a more chaotic fashion, so no lines.
Who's organised this?
Yeah. So we do Q&A, 10 minutes Q&A or however long Q&A, then drinks, and then we'll sort the books out, and then after that, well, who knows?
We'll get through it iteratively by small steps, because there isn't that much that can go horribly wrong.
Questions? Who's got questions? There's three. Okay, he was first, then Hannah, and then this gentleman.
Hi, me again. The cloud native, obviously, I understand the whole concept, etc. But we're moving towards a world, I suppose, of hybrid systems. Think about GPUs. Think about, I suppose, cloud native is also a way of thinking and a way of doing things. How would you justify that in a hybrid system with on-prem technology, cloud technology, multi-cloud technology, the stuff that I was hinting at before, federated, compute, all sorts of things? Is cloud native still?
Do you want that one?
Well, I don't mind. Actually, I'll go back many years in time to 15 years ago, nearly 20 years ago. I saw the first example of what I would really these days in my head think of as being cloud native, although it was before cloud. It wasn't something that would in any way be described these days by most people as cloud native. It was, I was head of IT for an early e-commerce. It was an underwear company called Big Leaves. Very, very early e-commerce. Everything we had was on-prem. Everything we did we wrote ourselves. There wasn't anything that anybody else had written. But we really wanted to be able to iterate more quickly on the website. So back in the day, before CMSs, we built a little mini CMS that allowed people to put HTML, that allowed the graphics team to make changes directly to the website without breaking anything else. So completely separate from the rest of the organisation and the IT team. And the graphics team moved out of the IT organisation and it moved into the marketing team. And then the marketing team just made all the changes they wanted to do. They did multiple releases a day, 10, 20 releases a day, small changes they were making on the website that were completely self-contained and safe. And it was a completely different way of working. Everybody could be vastly more iterative and less risk averse than they would have been had it been all going through a system with a full deployment and that kind of stuff. And that was before cloud. So obviously it was an attitude thing, not a technology thing. We built it on-prem, but we still had that iterative approach to things.
It's about release frequency then?
I would say
part of it, yeah.
It's about frequency, it's about the isolation of the risk. So we packaged it up in a way that people could make changes that were material to the business, really important to the business, with much less risk to the actual, maybe somebody might make a new piece of underwear pink instead of blue as they'd intended or whatever, but the whole site would stay up. They didn't have to worry that somebody was going to change something, that a designer was going to talk to a marketeer and they were saying, oh, can you change that just there? and they go and change it, and they didn't have to worry that the whole site was going to fall down.
Does it not require a terminology change? Because people, when they hear cloud and cloud native, they will just think about major providers. I don't think their question is correct.
I hate the word cloud. I hate the phrase cloud native, and I don't know where it came from.
So that goes back to the definition. Cloud native. That goes. I think it goes back to the definition. Microservice-oriented container packages, architectures for web scale applications. That's it. Boom. Now, we once did a Kubernetes setup, an air-gapped Kubernetes setup for a nuclear submarine. There was no internet connection, right? So that was not cloud native, but the principles of containerization, microservices, and then automated orchestration was transplantable. So it worked in two different contexts. One was an air-gapped piece of machinery, another was web scale applications. Some of them are transferable. Now, if you're working in a hybrid setup where the same company is doing edge and a bit of web development or application, if they're speaking to each other, you might get them together in some sort of tech stack. But if they're separate and they're not related, well, you would just have different teams. So you've got to think about Venn diagrams, really. What is applicable? Microservices can work in different contexts. They're brilliant with containers and Kubernetes in web. But in that book, there's lots of things that are transferable to different contexts.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's terrible. Cloud native is a terrible, terrible name, but that battle seemed to have been lost.
Well,
10 years ago.
I think it's a terrible name apart from for that specific architecture. It's very microservice containers, public cloud. Boom. That's a great definition.
That is true.
And people stretch it. They say, "Oh, we're cloud native," even though I don't know, doing something else. Okay, Hannah, moving on. Hannah.
Oh, okay. So, I've read your other book about cloud native transformation, and that's maybe out of date compared to this one, but one of the little nuggets in it that I still use today is about the psychological biases that will get in the way of people embracing change.
Yep.
And one of those was the IKEA effect, about how you place higher value on things that you've helped to build yourself. And that's one of the things that, as a product person, I have to be aware of, because it's like, do I build or do I buy? I know that my heart wants to build, and yet the right decision might be to buy. And so anyway, my question is basically about those psychological biases that they're very human, they're very real, they're everywhere, that actually might impede change and impede embracing this cloud native aspect.
Okay, so the question is about psychological biases, which is covered in another book I helped write called Cloud Native Transformation. So that idea was the other author's, Pinney's idea, to put the biases in, and it was really smart. It makes the book a bit deeper. So that book is what is cloud, etc., and then in a number of patterns, actually about 90 patterns. And for those who don't know, pattern language is a pattern is usually a reusable solution to a known problem. So for example, if you want to work out user behavior, A/B testing is one pattern. But biases, psychological biases, are really important part of human behavior. So the IKEA effect, also known as, what was that woman who asked you to put an egg in your Kevin will know this. What was that woman called? You put an egg in that, you got a baking mix from
Betty Crocker.
The Betty Crocker effect. So basically, in America, they had these baking kits, and all you did was tip them in your bowl, put water in, whisk them, and a cake would come out. And housewives...
They're great kits, I love them.
Yeah, well, they were great. Housewives, I guess, is who it was originally aimed at, and then later other people. But they didn't like it because they felt like they were cheating. This wasn't real baking. So sales of this product went down. So they took out the powdered egg from the mixture, and then they wrote on the box, you have to put water in and add an egg. And so the person making the cake felt part of the production process. So IKEA, the reason people... Okay, let's do a quick poll. Who likes IKEA? Who hates IKEA? Yeah, right? So IKEA divides opinion. It's like, why are you making... I can't do IKEA, by the way. I don't know how to do it. I'm a software person. I'm not a hardware person, right? So IKEA, the people who love IKEA, and it's probably unconscious, is that you are actually the final stage of the manufacturing process. You do it at your house. And for some people, it gives them great satisfaction. So when we're going to the cloud, or when we're managing people and saying, okay, I've got a solution, you can't present something that's completely finished, because the people you're working with need to feel they've contributed to part of the solution. So these are the sort of black belt management techniques that you need, and these psychological biases are the ones you have to understand and have in your back pocket, because you can use them to your advantage. I don't know if there was a question in there or an answer, but is that all right?
Yeah. I'm just interested in psychology of change.
Yeah, sorry, well, there's one question here. Yeah.
Yes, so thinking about green software, what are your thoughts on America exiting the Paris Agreement?
It's an interesting thing that I think we have to move forward anyway. So if you feel depressed about about the world going green and everything else, go on to have you heard of Our World in Data? That's a site where you can go and have a look at data and get charts for all kinds of interesting. Get it to show you the chart for solar power generation globally. It is a chart that is going up like that. It's not even exponential. It's practically vertically asymptotic. And you look at that and you think, things that going like, it's like exponential growth is not only for bad things. It's not only for pandemics. It's once things are growing exponentially and it's now become cheap and it's become, it's a hugely distributed technology. Everybody can put solar panels on their roofs. It's a really, really distributed technology. It's so suited to exponential growth. I think that we're on that road. And therefore, even no matter, there are a few bumps from Trump and things like that. But if you look at the places in the world where solar is being rolled out fastest, they include Texas. And Texas are doing loads of interesting things about trying to persuade people to build large flexible loads to run on solar and all kinds of things. A lot of the interesting work in taking advantage of that better super exponential growth is coming from places that are naturally Trump states. So I don't think, don't give up. Don't give up.
So about the Paris Accords, it doesn't matter if they've pulled out, because nobody was hitting the targets anyway. Right? So it doesn't matter. Around about 1936, a bunch of journalists at Forbes magazine got together and imagined what the next 30 years would look like. And they said, well, with automation, we're going to have high-paying jobs. The manual stuff's going to go away. We're going to rise to a different plateau, and then people will have more money they can spend, and American growth will be off the charts. They wrote this in the midst of the Depression, brainstorming in the Forbes office. Everybody went mad. It's irresponsible journalism. John Maynard Keynes went absolutely mad. Who could even imagine such a pathetic future, given the context? And yet they were proven to be right. Now, I'm not a techno-optimist. I hate techno-optimists.
I'm
right?
a techno-optimist.
Yeah. It's a love-hate thing. So I'm not into that. But I always remember that story, because there's a reason for that. This Trump is designed to grab headlines. That's what he's doing. He's grabbing headlines. Away from the headlines, you've got people, researchers, citizens, people in businesses, people like me. I try to run a good business at Container Solutions. I try to move the needle. People do these things for three reasons. They're curious, they're altruistic, or they're greedy bastards and they want to make money. But either way, they move things forward. So away from the attention-grabbing headlines, society moves forward inch by inch by inch. We cannot afford to give up hope. It's so easy right now to just put your head in, they're all Nazis, it's neo-fascism, or what, nobody taxed the rich, Joe Biden failed. It is so hopeless, but they want you to think that. They need you to think that. So our duty is to keep hopeful. And if you meet a fascist, just punch him in the face, that's all right. That's okay, because in Yorkshire, that's how we deal with that shit. But so you've got to remain hopeful and rational. And sometimes shit happens. It happened in the Second World War, and we'll deal with that as well. I think you were first.
Question on microservices specifically. So,
yeah.
As microservices became more popular and people moved to them, do you think there's a danger that we've split some things into microservices that didn't need to be, so where they don't scale?
Yes.
and they don't need, and they can't be upgraded separately, say. And actually, what you end up with is extra complexity that doesn't really apply much.
Yes, so Hannah touched on this earlier. When I was running that web project I mentioned earlier that gave me depression, that wasn't a joke, by the way, I was deadly serious about that. My colleague wanted to use aspects. Does anybody remember aspect J for Java? Use regular expressions to drop in code after it was compiled into bytecode. And he had some cockamamie reason. The only reason he wanted to do it was because he wanted to experiment with aspects. And I'm like, what if you put a bunch of breakpoints in the middle of loops by accident? I said, do you know regular expressions? No. I said, no, nobody does. Even the people who write the books about it. So most people, managers and techies, managers who should know better and techies who should know better, do things because they're curious. They want to mess around with the cloud. They want to kick the tires. Most microservice architectures, 95% of them, are microservice architectures because the person building them thought they'd be a laugh. And then they later rationalise it. Oh, it's for scalability and speed. Jamie Dobson said. so yes is the answer to your question.
Yeah, if only people. I mean, it's a hard one, isn't it? Because you want people to experiment. You want people to. People are always going to go too far, aren't they? It's So yeah, just because something is for microservices doesn't mean that there's a good reason for it to be for microservices rather than one.
So what I'm flabbergasted by, and I still can't quite comprehend this, and it's taken me 30 years and I still can't comprehend it. When I was a student at university, they drilled it into us. Everything starts with the user, and you work backwards from that. So many people just don't understand or don't care about that. What have aspects or microservices got to do with a customer or a real user? So I came from a university where software engineering was taken quite seriously, and it was what's the user, what's the need, and how do we service that? And I took that with me into the world of work, where I discovered that nobody gives a shit.
There's too many self-taught people out there. That's why they don't come from an abstracted, educated background.
I'm not sure if that's true. There are lots of self-taught people out there, but the ones I've crossed paths with are quite savvy because they're autodidact. You know, never judge somebody who mispronounces a word. It means they've read it and never been taught it.
I'm just talking about my experience.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, but did you have that in your formal education, starting with the user?
There was a certain amount of formality, but we didn't do that level of software engineering because it hadn't been invented yet.
Yeah. It was barely invented when I was at school.
It's like, start with the whiteboard. It's like, start with the whiteboard. The whiteboard, the most underappreciated piece of technology available to humankind.
Yes.
I had a question around the definition of cloud native. I guess more because of maybe my understanding of it. So I want you to tell me if I'm wrong, if I've always been wrong, or maybe it's changed in the last few years, I don't know. So my definition of cloud native was like, maybe you have an application in Python, Java, whatever, or maybe you want to use Postgres. But you don't care the operating system that code is running on, you don't care where it's hosted. Well, I'm not talking region, I'm talking what kind of server it's running on. You just want the cloud to deal with the scale natively. And in my mind, when cloud native term came along, containers actually weren't a part of that. It was just take the code and run it. So I'm talking about like Google App Engine or Amazon Lambda.
Yeah.
You couldn't run containers in that for a long time.
Yeah.
So is that correct? Cloud native used to be that, and now has it transformed into something else, i.e. where you can run containers? Because in my mind, you very much do need to know about the operating system if you're running containers, because you need to know if it's running on Linux or Windows or whatever. So has the definition changed to include containers now?
I think it changed a long time ago. I agree that really way back, if you look at Google, their original plan was, why on earth would anybody want to do any of this stuff? Just put some code in App Engine and do it all. And actually that was extremely sensible. But the reality is that it wasn't really meeting people where they were. You know what I mean? And you need ways to get from a monolith to that, and without throwing everything away, starting from scratch.
Yeah.
Containers
are an intermediate step. It's also not
Yeah.
new. There was cPanel and Plesk before that, which did exactly the same thing
Yeah.
way before
Yeah.
AWS.
I would say that the unifying, which is one of the reasons why I did my little dog and pony show at the beginning, I think that the thing that fundamentally links all of these concepts is the ability to isolate stuff so that you can experiment and move around and have people working on things and deploying things without breaking everybody else in the business, not having everything tied together.
Right.
Which you couldn't do unless you had.
Yeah, and on that happy note, I think you've heard enough of us two, so the drinks can now continue and the conversations continue. Thank you so much, Anne. Thank you so much for listening.